Hi everyone, for my computer vision research paper presentation, I'll be talking about SkinLesNet, a classification of skin lesions and detection of melanoma cancer using a novel, multi-layer, deep convolutional neural network. So within the United States and countries worldwide, skin cancer is a very common form of cancer that's caused by damages to DNA helices, primarily through UV rays from the sun, as well as artificial methods such as tanning beds. And there are three common forms of skin cancer, which are the basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. And even though melanoma only accounts for 4% of the skin cancers, it's still responsible for 75% of all skin cancer related deaths. And it's important to note that early identification of melanoma leads to a higher survival rate within a 5-year survival rate span of 94%, which is pretty remarkable. So a little bit about the SkinLesNet background. The objective that the researchers had was to develop a multi-layer convolutional neural network that was able to identify skin lesions which into three unique classes: melanoma, nevus, and seborrheic keratosis. And what's incredible is that multiple studies have shown that deep convolutional neural networks they have similar diagnostic effectiveness and when compared to DO and MD doctors, specifically dermatologists. So in looking a little bit about the data and methodologies, TensorFlow and Keras were the primary deep learning libraries that were used in order to actually develop the architecture of the model. And the performance of the SkinLesNet model was compared to two benchmarks, which were the ResNet 50 and VGG16 models. And both of these models were used because they're very commonly used image classification, specifically for medical image classification models within the medical industry. And when looking at figure one, we see the PAD UFES dataset, or just a subset of samples. And these are the clinical medical images of nevus, seborrheic keratosis, as well as melanoma. And the data set included 520 melanoma images, 408 nevus images, and 386 seborrheic keratosis images. And when looking at the PAD UFES 20 dataset, it's important to note that not only did it have these clinical images, but also had smartphone captured images, which is really nice for generalizability, especially if you're trying to integrate the model within a smartphone for a normal day use of patients. A little bit more on the data and methodologies. An 80-20 ratio was used, 80% training set and 20% test set split, and which is pretty common to what we do in class. And other commonly known medical imaging data sets, such as the HAM 10,000, as well as the IC 2017 data sets, were also used to provide more generalizability of the model. And when looking at figure two here, we see that there's no class imbalance when training the SkinLesNet model, which is really key, especially for classification models, because you don't want one class to completely dominate the other, which might really hinder the performance of the model downstream. So going a little bit into the model architecture, the SkinLesNet model used a 4-layer convolutional neural network. And there were a couple of metrics that were used in order to make sure that the skin lesions were actually being identified correctly. And that was the accuracy, the precision, the recall, and the F1 score metrics. Convolutional layers were used for extracting key features of the skin lesions, whether it be the size, the shape, um, the color, etc. And the pooling layers here were used primarily to introduce spatial reduction for the images, but also maintaining the key features. ReLU functions were used in order to introduce nonlinearity so that the model can capture more complex patterns as well as more nonlinear patterns. And overfitting was handled by using multiple dropout layers, as seen in figure 3. Dropout layers are nice because they can activate and deactivate neurons, which makes the model more generalizable. And a softmax layer was used in order to create probabilities for the 3 different skin lesions to see which one the model would classify. So when looking at the results of the SkinLesNet model, it's important to see that on the PAD UFES 20 dataset, which was primarily used, it yielded a 96% test accuracy, 97% precision score, 92% recall score, and a 92% F1 score. And that's further highlighted here in table 4. And the SkinLesNet also outperformed the two benchmarks that we talked about earlier, the ResNet 50 and the CGG 16, which had accuracies of 82% and 79%, respectively. And as well as on the two other key data sets, which were the HAM 10,000 and the ISIC 2017 data sets, the ResNet, or I'm sorry, the SkinLesNet outperformed the two benchmark models on those as well. And when observing figure 4, we see that although it only has 8 epochs here, by the course of 100 epochs, the validation accuracy reached 96%, which means that over the course of the training process, the model was better able to capture the correct classifications of the skin lesions. And over the course of the epochs, also, the training loss as well as validation loss also tend to decrease, which is definitely a good sign. So when going over the question and answers, we have two questions here. What are two techniques that the researchers used to handle overfitting? The first one we talked about a little bit earlier was the dropout layers that were used. And the dropout layers are key because they can deactivate certain neurons as well as activate certain neurons, allowing the model to be more generalizable, as well as using data augmentation, which prevents overfitting because the model could then see various transformations of the images, such as rotations, flipping, adding noise into the images, etc. Question number 2, why did the researchers opt to use a lower learning rate? Like common classical machine learning, using a learning rate of such as 0.001, the model is probably able to converge better to the optimal minima, and won't overshoot the minima by using a learning rate that's high. And the lower the learning rate also makes the optimization more precise, and that's also key to prevent the model from overfitting. And this is the AMA citation for the paper. And thank you.